They ignored the quiet human. Then, their fleets bled to death. Became reality as Lieutenant Mara Kane's hidden human frigates emerged from the shadows, forming the perfect, bleeding ring around divided Krevthar forces. While Coalition AI systems crashed, human vessels executed unpredictable attacks that devastated Marshal Gresham's fleet. As the enemy flagship erupted in flames, Mara's transmission echoed across all channels. "You bled because you ignored the quiet human." The Voran Coalition War Council chamber, aboard the spinning orbital station, High Justice, hummed with the low-frequency vibrations of power conduits and tactical displays. Holographic war maps cast eerie blue light across the faces of 12 different species, gathered around the massive projection table. In orbit, around the contested star system of Krethar 9, the station served as the nerve center for Coalition military operations in this sector of space. Lieutenant Mara Kane stood perfectly still, the lone human strategist embedded within the Coalition's Grand War Council. Her crisp, black uniform with silver piping bore no decorations beyond the simple Coalition insignia and the small Earth emblem on her collar. Unlike the other delegates who shifted, gestured, and occasionally raised their voices, Mara remained motionless, her unreadable gaze fixed on the tactical displays hovering above the central table. The other delegates largely ignored her presence. Humans were latecomers to the interstellar community, and many species dismissed their silence as weakness. They were wrong. Admiral Lothar Veen, the imposing Voran commander, whose species had founded the Coalition 3 centuries earlier, manipulated the hologram with a six-fingered hand. His gray-scaled skin reflected the blue light as he expanded a sector near the outer defensive perimeter. "The Krevthar battle groups have been massing here. Here, and here," he said, marking 3 points with glowing red indicators. "Intelligence suggests they will launch a full-scale invasion within 30 standard cycles. Their target appears to be the Trellix habitation spheres in the Krethar system." The chamber fell silent. Trellix housed over 6 million civilians from 17 different species. If the Krevthar took the spheres, the slaughter would be unimaginable. Commander Tarek Voss, the Coalition's AI overseer, stepped forward. His cybernetically enhanced body whirred softly as he connected directly to the war table's interface. "Our predictive algorithms have processed all available data on Krevthar battle tactics from the last 7 engagements. The Warmind calculates a 94.3% probability that they will follow this approach vector." A glowing orange pathway appeared in the hologram, cutting through the Coalition's outer defense ring. Mara studied the projection, noting the complex calculations and probability matrices hovering beside each potential encounter point. Something felt wrong about the predicted invasion route, but she couldn't immediately identify what troubled her. The 12 senior admirals nodded in unison as Commander Voss outlined the Coalition's counter-strategy. Voran military doctrine had relied on predictive AI systems for nearly 2 centuries, and their faith in the technology was absolute. Mara had learned during her 3-year assignment that questioning the Warmind's calculations was considered somewhere between blasphemy and treason. "Based on these projections," Commander Voss continued, "we recommend reinforcing these 3 checkpoint stations and repositioning our destroyer groups to create a containment envelope around the predicted Krevthar thrust." More indicators appeared on the map, blue Coalition markers moving into defensive positions. When the formal briefing concluded, Admiral Veen opened the floor for questions. Various commanders sought clarification on specific deployment orders, supply chains, and communication protocols. Mara remained silent until nearly all questions had been addressed. Then she spoke for the first time, her voice calm and measured. "What redundancies are in place for the communication relays at Outpost Delta?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Admiral Vane glanced at her with barely concealed impatience, then looked past her to acknowledge another commander with a more pressing question about fleet deployments. Mara's inquiry went unanswered. She didn't repeat herself. Instead, she listened carefully as the open discussion revealed more details about the coalition's battle plan. Their entire strategy hinged on perfect coordination between fleet elements, which in turn depended on uninterrupted communication through the relay network. And Outpost Delta, sitting in the shadow of a mineral-rich asteroid field that interfered with long-range transmissions, served as the critical link in that network. It was a fatal flaw. If Delta went dark, the entire eastern quadrant of the defense grid would lose synchronization. And the Warmind's projection had entirely overlooked this vulnerability. Mara's mind raced as she considered the implications. The Krevthar were brutal and direct, but not stupid. Their scouts would have mapped the communication infrastructure and identified the same weakness. Yet the Coalition's much-vaunted predictive AI had missed it entirely, focused instead on calculating weapon yields and deployment patterns, according to historical data. Some things couldn't be reduced to algorithms. Human instinct told her the Krevthar would strike at the heart of the communication network, not follow the Warmind's projected invasion route. As the council meeting concluded and the admirals dispersed to their respective command posts, Mara made her decision. Protocol demanded she report her concerns through official coalition channels, where they would be analyzed, processed, and ultimately dismissed by the Warmind's filtering algorithms. Instead, she would bypass coalition channels entirely and warn the human fleet stationed beyond the nebula. It might be considered treason if discovered, but millions of lives hung in the balance. The corridor outside the council chamber was nearly empty as Mara made her way to her small quarters. She closed the door behind her, engaged the privacy shield, and removed a small device from beneath her desk. The quantum entanglement communicator wasn't strictly forbidden to human officers, but using it to circumvent coalition command structures certainly was. She activated the device and entered the secure code sequence that would connect her to Captain Elena Reyes, commander of the 7th Human Expeditionary Fleet, stationed at the edge of coalition space. "Elena, it's Mara," she said when the connection established. "We have a situation. The coalition is blind to an obvious vulnerability, and I need your help." Over the next hour, Mara outlined her concerns and her plan. The human fleets wouldn't be able to stop the Krevthar invasion alone, but they could position themselves to intervene when the coalition's defenses inevitably failed. Captain Reyes listened without interruption, then nodded. "I'll activate the strike squadrons and position them in the shadow lanes," Reyes confirmed. "But you know what happens if the coalition discovers we've acted independently." "I know," Mara said, "but I've run the scenarios. If we don't do this, 6 million civilians die." "Understood. We'll be in position within 18 hours. Reyes out." The connection terminated, and Mara destroyed the communication record. She had just committed herself to a course of action that would either save millions of lives or end her career in disgrace. Possibly both. The next morning, Mara returned to the War Council chamber for the daily strategic update. Admiral Vane looked even more imposing than usual, his scaled skin flushed with a dark purple tint of stress or anger. "Our long-range scouts have detected increased Krevthar activity near the primary approach vector," he announced. "The Warmind's predictions appear to be holding true. All fleet elements will accelerate deployment to their assigned positions." Commander Voss stepped forward again, his cybernetic implants gleaming under the chamber lights. "We have updated the combat projections based on the latest intelligence," he said. "The Warmind now calculates a 96.7% probability of success if all units maintain formation integrity and communication discipline." Several admirals nodded with satisfaction at the improved odds. Mara kept her expression neutral. But internally, she was calculating a very different probability. Based on her assessment of the communication vulnerability at Outpost Delta, she estimated less than a 30% chance that the coalition strategy would succeed. After the briefing, Admiral Vane approached her directly for the first time in months. "Lieutenant Kane," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You seem unconvinced by our strategy." Mara met his gaze. "I have concerns about communication redundancy, Admiral." "Ah, yes. Your question yesterday." He waved a six-fingered hand dismissively. "The Warmind has calculated a negligible probability of communication failure. Your human superstition about backup systems is unnecessary. With respect, Admiral, redundancy isn't superstition. It's prudence." The Admiral's scales darkened slightly. "The Coalition has fought 17 major engagements under the guidance of the Warmind. We have prevailed in 16 of them. Your species has been spacefaring for barely 2 centuries. Perhaps you should trust in systems that have proven their worth." Before Mara could respond, he turned and walked away, effectively ending the conversation. She watched him go, aware that she had just lost any chance of convincing the Coalition leadership through official channels. That night, she received a secure transmission from Captain Reyes. "Strike squadrons are in position." The message read, "Maintaining silent running in the shadow lanes as directed. Awaiting your signal." Mara sent a single-word acknowledgement. Confirmed. Now, all she could do was wait and watch as events unfolded. 3 days later, the Coalition's long-range sensors detected the first wave of Krevthar warships entering the outer system. The massive vessels, their hulls bristling with weapon emplacements, moved in perfect formation toward the predicted invasion corridor. Coalition admirals watched with grim satisfaction as the enemy followed the exact approach vector the Warmind had calculated. "All fleet elements, assume defensive posture Alpha." Admiral Veen ordered, "Prepare to engage when the enemy reaches the outer marker." Mara studied the tactical display with growing concern. The Krevthar advance seemed too perfect, too precisely aligned with the Warmind's predictions. She had studied enough military history to recognize a feint when she saw one. And then it happened. A secondary alert flashed on the tactical display, initially relegated to a minor notification channel by the filtering algorithms. Mara spotted it immediately. A small group of Krevthar stealth vessels approaching Outpost Delta from an oblique angle, masked by the asteroid field's electromagnetic interference. "Admiral," she called out, breaking protocol. "We have hostile movement near Outpost Delta." Admiral Veen glanced at the secondary display with irritation. "A diversionary tactic. The Warmind has accounted for it. The main thrust remains along the primary vector." "Sir, if Delta's communication relays are compromised—" "Lieutenant Kane," Commander Voss interrupted. "The probability of a significant tactical advantage from such a minor strike is less than 8.2%. Our forces are deployed optimally based on superior intelligence and processing capability." Mara fell silent. There was no point arguing further. Instead, she discreetly activated her personal terminal and sent a coded burst transmission to Captain Reyes. "Shadow protocol active. Delta compromised." Within minutes, the tactical display updated with new information. The Krevthar stealth group had reached Outpost Delta and launched a precision strike against its communication array. Alerts began cascading through the system as the Eastern Quadrant's fleet elements suddenly lost synchronization with the command network. "Communication disruption in sectors 7 through 13, a technician reported, their voice tight with stress. "Attempting to reroute through secondary channels." Commander Voss connected directly to the war table again, his cybernetic systems working furiously to adapt the battle plan. "The Warmind is recalculating. Defensive formations will adjust to compensate for the communication loss." But it was already too late. The main Krevthar battle group suddenly altered course, abandoning the predicted invasion corridor and accelerating toward the now vulnerable Eastern Quadrant. Without coordinated defensive fire, the Coalition's carefully positioned destroyer groups were isolated and exposed. "All fleet elements in sectors 9 and 10 fall back to secondary positions," Admiral Veen ordered. But the communication blackout prevented the message from reaching its destination. Mara watched in silence as the disaster she had anticipated began to unfold. Coalition vessels, unable to coordinate their movements or fire control, were being picked off one by the advancing Krevthar warships. And then, something unexpected appeared on the tactical display. 15 unidentified vessels emerged from the shadow of the nebula, moving in perfect formation toward the flank of the Krevthar advance. They weren't broadcasting coalition identification codes, but Mara recognized the signature patterns of human frigates from the 7th Expeditionary Fleet. "Unknown vessels detected in Sector 12, a sensor operator announced. "They appear to be engaging the Krevthar vanguard." The council chamber erupted in confusion as the tactical display updated to show the human vessels executing a perfect ambush maneuver against the Krevthar flank. Rail torpedoes, a uniquely human weapon technology, streaked across the battlefield, bypassing Krevthar shields and detonating against their engine sections. "What is the meaning of this?" Admiral Veen demanded, his gaze locking onto Mara. "Those are human vessels operating outside Coalition command structure." Before Mara could respond, the tactical display updated again. The human frigates had inflicted crippling damage on the Krevthar vanguard, forcing them to break formation and regroup. The unexpected attack had bought precious time for the isolated Coalition destroyers to fall back to more defensible positions. Sir," Commander Voss reported, his voice strained. "The Warmind is having difficulty integrating these new variables. The human attack pattern does not conform to any known tactical doctrine." "That's the point," Mara said quietly. The Krevthar response was swift and brutal. Marshal Gresham, the infamous commander of the Krevthar Armada, ordered a full-burn flanking maneuver to surround and destroy the human interlopers. Half of the Krevthar battle group peeled away from their advance toward the Coalition's main defensive line and reoriented toward the human frigates. It was exactly what Mara had been counting on. She activated her terminal again and sent another coded transmission. Phase 2, Iron Circle. Within moments, 20 more human vessels emerged from hiding places throughout the asteroid field, where they had been waiting in powered-down stealth mode. They moved with precision to form a perfect encirclement around the now-divided Krevthar forces, a maneuver that human tacticians called the Bleeding Ring. On the tactical display, Coalition officers watched in astonishment as the human vessels executed complex, unpredictable attack patterns that seemed to anticipate and counter every Krevthar response. They didn't move according to any algorithm or predictable pattern, instead adapting their tactics in real time based on the enemy's reactions. The Coalition's Warmind, attempting to process and predict these unorthodox maneuvers, began to experience computational overload. Warning indicators flashed across Commander Voss's console as the predictive systems struggled to keep pace with the chaotic battlefield developments. "The Warmind cannot establish stable prediction matrices," Voss reported, alarm evident in his voice. "Human vessel movements appear random, but are achieving statistically improbable tactical advantages." "Not random," Mara corrected, stepping forward to address the Council directly. "Adaptive. Human commanders are making intuitive decisions based on battlefield conditions, not following pre-calculated patterns." On the tactical display, the human frigates continued their relentless assault on the Krevthar flanks. Rail torpedoes severed supply lines and communication arrays, while precision beam weapons targeted the massive engines of the Krevthar capital ships. One by one, the enemy vessels began to falter and drift, their coordinated attack dissolving into individual survival efforts. Marshal Gresham, renowned for his tactical brilliance and ruthlessness, attempted to rally his forces for a counterattack. But the human vessels seemed to anticipate his every move, shifting their formation to counter each new threat before it fully developed. It was as though they could read the Krevthar commander's mind. In reality, Mara had spent 3 years studying every recorded engagement involving Marshal Gresham. She knew his tendencies, his preferences, his fallback patterns, and she had briefed Captain Reyes on exactly how to exploit them. The council chamber fell silent as Coalition admirals watched the unfolding battle with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The war mind, their infallible tactical guide for 2 centuries, had failed to predict this outcome. Meanwhile, a single human lieutenant and her species' small contingent of ships were turning the tide against an enemy that had threatened to overwhelm the entire coalition defense network. The climactic moment came when Marshal Gresham ordered his flagship to break through the human encirclement with a full-power burn. Captain Reyes had anticipated this desperate maneuver and positioned her fastest frigates directly in the flagship's path. As the massive Krevthar vessel accelerated, the human ships launched a synchronized barrage of rail torpedoes targeted at its command section. The tactical display flared with the energy signature of multiple direct hits. The Krevthar flagship's engines died, and secondary explosions cascaded along its length as power systems overloaded and ammunition stores detonated. The Marshal's bridge erupted in a blinding flash, visible even on the long-range sensors. In that moment of victory, Mara activated the coalition-wide communication channel and transmitted a single sentence. "You bled because you ignored the quiet human." The message reached every functioning coalition vessel and command center. In the council chamber, all eyes turned to Lieutenant Mara Kane, who stood calmly before the tactical display as the battle's momentum shifted decisively against the Krevthar invasion force. With their command structure shattered and their forces divided, the surviving Krevthar vessels began a fighting retreat. The human frigates, now supported by rallying coalition destroyers, harried their withdrawal, inflicting additional casualties while carefully avoiding civilian habitation zones. In the aftermath, the debris of both Krevthar and coalition vessels drifted in silent orbit around Krithar 9. Mara ordered the human ships to stand down from combat operations and divert resources to civilian evacuation efforts and emergency repairs on damaged habitation spheres. Admiral Veen approached her as the immediate crisis subsided. His scales had paled to an ashen gray, a sign of extreme stress, or possibly humility, a rare emotion among Varans. "Lieutenant Kane," he said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone, "it appears we owe you and your unauthorized human reinforcements a debt of gratitude." Mara met his gaze evenly. "I tried to warn you about the communication vulnerability at Outpost Delta." "Yes, you did." The Admiral was silent for a moment. "Our reliance on the Warmind's predictions has perhaps become excessive. Your species' approach to warfare is unorthodox, but effective. Humans haven't forgotten how to think for ourselves. Admiral, sometimes intuition sees what algorithms miss." In the days that followed, the surviving coalition admirals convened a special session to review the battle and its implications. Commander Voss reported that the Warmind had suffered significant cognitive degradation due to its inability to process the human battle tactics. The system attempted to identify patterns where none existed, he explained. The human vessels appeared to be operating according to some form of swarm intelligence that defied algorithmic prediction. "Not swarm intelligence," Mara corrected. "Individual initiative within a flexible strategic framework. Each ship captain had freedom to adapt tactics based on local conditions, while maintaining the overall objective." The concept was almost heretical to coalition military doctrine, which had evolved to prioritize perfect coordination and algorithmic efficiency over individual decision-making. But the results could not be denied. 1 week after the battle, a secure communication arrived from the Krevthar retreat zone. Marshal Gresham, who had survived the destruction of his flagship, requested a holographic parley with the coalition leadership, and specifically with Lieutenant Mara Kane. The council chamber was tense as the holographic projection of the Krevthar Marshal materialized above the central table. Marshal Gresham was imposing even as a projection, a massive, heavily armored figure with ceremonial battle scars etched into the plated ridges of his face. His 4 eyes, positioned to provide perfect battlefield awareness, scanned the chamber before settling on Mara. "Lieutenant Kane," he rumbled, his translator converting the guttural Krevthar language into standardized coalition speech. "The architect of our defeat." Mara inclined her head slightly. "Marshal Gresham, I have fought the coalition for 20 cycles," the marshal continued. "Their tactics have always been predictable, efficient but predictable. Yours were not." There was something like respect in his alien voice. "The encirclement maneuver, the bleeding ring, a human tactic." "An old one," Mara confirmed. "From Earth's history. Hannibal against the Romans at Cannae, over 4,000 years ago." The marshal's outer eyes narrowed, a gesture of surprise or appreciation. "Your species understands something that both the Coalition and the Krevthar have forgotten. The value of historical wisdom over computational prediction." He raised a massive, armored hand in a formal military salute, a gesture that transcended species boundaries. "We withdraw from Krithar space, not from fear, but from respect. The Krevthar do not waste lives against worthy opponents when honorable terms can be reached." Mara returned the salute, embodying humanity's unique blend of restraint and ferocity. "The Coalition will consider fair terms. Marshal, the civilians of Trellix deserve peace." The holographic parley concluded with the establishment of preliminary ceasefire conditions. As the projection faded, Admiral Veen turned to Mara with new respect in his eyes. "It seems your species has more to offer the Coalition than we realized, Lieutenant." In the months that followed, the Coalition councils undertook a comprehensive review of their military doctrine. New protocols were established ensuring that all strategic voices, even the quietest, would be heard and considered. Human squadron leaders were granted official station among the Voran ranks, and cross-species tactical training became standard practice throughout Coalition forces. Mara Kane was promoted to commander and assigned to lead a new division focused on integrating intuitive tactics with algorithmic prediction systems. The goal was not to abandon the war mind entirely, but to complement its computational power with the creative adaptability that humans brought to warfare. As formal peace negotiations with the Krevthar began, Mara found herself reflecting on the cost of silence and the power of a single voice to change the tide of war. The Coalition had nearly fallen because they had dismissed her concerns, had ignored the quiet human in their midst. Never again would they make that mistake. Standing at the observation deck overlooking the massive habitation spheres of Trellix, now safe from the threat of invasion, Mara watched the distant pinpoints of light that marked patrolling Coalition vessels, now including human frigates flying the combined insignia. Captain Reyes joined her, still wearing her battle-stained uniform from the recent skirmish. "Not bad for a diplomatic incident," Reyes said with a slight smile. "You could have been court-martialed for circumventing Coalition command." "Still might be," Mara replied, "but it was worth it. 6 million civilians who didn't die would agree with you." Reyes gestured toward the habitation spheres. "And the Coalition is listening now. To all voices, I hope, not just human ones. That's the real victory here, isn't it? Getting them to understand that strength comes in many forms. Sometimes the quietest voice has the most important thing to say." Mara nodded, watching as a formation of ships, Coalition, human, and even a single Krevthar observer vessel passed in synchronized flight above the Trellix spheres, a symbol of the new understanding that had emerged from the ashes of battle. "They bled because they ignored the quiet human," Reyes quoted. "Nice touch with that broadcast, by the way." "Sometimes you need to make sure the lesson sticks," Mara said with the ghost of a smile. "Even if it means breaking protocol." As peace negotiations continued in the following weeks, Mara found herself increasingly in the company of Admiral Veen. The Voran commander had undergone a remarkable transformation, evolving from condescension to genuine collaboration. During one particularly productive strategy session, he made a confession that surprised her. "We have relied too heavily on our technology. Commander Kane, he said, using her new rank with evident respect. "The Voran became spacefaring nearly 1,000 years ago. In that time, we have gradually surrendered our intuition to our machines." "It's an easy trap to fall into," Mara acknowledged. "Humans have made similar mistakes throughout our history. Yet you recovered from them. How?" Mara considered the question carefully. "We had to learn the hard way. Earth nearly destroyed itself in the 21st century through over-reliance on algorithmic systems for everything from resource allocation to defense. When those systems failed, as all systems eventually do, we were forced to reclaim our decision-making capacity." "A painful lesson." "The best ones usually are." Admiral Veen's outer eyelids flickered, a Voran expression of thoughtful agreement. "The Coalition was founded on the principle that diverse species bring diverse strengths. Yet we had forgotten that principle in our military doctrine. We sought uniformity instead of unity." "There's still time to correct course," Mara said. "The Krevthar respect strength, but they respect wisdom more. If we can demonstrate both, these peace negotiations have a real chance of success." 2 months after the Battle of Krithar 9, as it was now being called in Coalition records, a formal peace treaty was signed between the Coalition and the Krevthar Imperium. The terms were fair, establishing clear boundaries and resource-sharing agreements that acknowledged the legitimate interests of both powers. Most importantly, civilian worlds like Trellex were designated as neutral zones, protected from military action by either side. Marshal Gresham, still bearing the scars of his narrow escape, represented the Krevthar at the signing ceremony. Afterward, he approached Mara directly. "Commander Kane," he said, his massive form towering over her. "I have studied your species since our encounter. Humans are fascinating. So physically fragile, yet mentally formidable." "We've had to be," Mara replied. "When you can't overpower an opponent, you learn to outthink them." The Marshal made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. "A valuable evolutionary adaptation. The Krevthar evolved as apex predators on a harsh world. Physical dominance was our path, but perhaps that path has limits that yours does not." "Every species has something to teach the others," Mara said. "That's the true potential of this peace. Not just the absence of war, but the presence of mutual growth." Marshal Gresham considered her words, then extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement that he had evidently studied. "To mutual growth, Commander Kane." Mara shook his massive hand, acutely aware of the historical significance of the moment. The first formal handshake between human and Krevthar, symbolizing a new era of potential cooperation between former enemies. As the peace treaty took effect and Coalition worlds began the process of recovery and rebuilding, Mara found herself unexpectedly summoned to Earth. The human government, it seemed, was keenly interested in her unique perspective on Coalition-Krevthar relations. The journey back to humanity's homeworld gave her time to reflect on everything that had transpired. From her initial assignment as a token human presence on the Coalition War Council, to her current status as a respected commander whose tactical innovations had saved millions of lives. Her path had been anything but predictable. Earth had changed in the years she'd been away. The sprawling megacities had grown more vertical, with hanging gardens cascading down the sides of arcology towers. The climate restoration projects had made significant progress, with vast swathes of previously arid land now covered in engineered forests designed to maximize carbon capture. The Global Defense Council headquarters in New Geneva was still the same imposing structure of nano-reinforced concrete and transparency steel that she remembered. Inside, the highest-ranking military and civilian leaders of Earth waited to hear her assessment of the Coalition Krevthar peace prospects. Admiral Helena Chen, no relation to any character previously mentioned, presided over the council, a legendary figure in Earth's defense forces. She had commanded the first human fleet to engage in joint operations with the Coalition nearly 2 decades earlier. Commander Kane, the Admiral began after the formal introductions had concluded. Your actions at Krythar 9 have significantly altered the balance of power in that sector. Earth needs to understand the implications. Mara stood at parade rest before the semicircular table where the council members sat. The immediate implication is peace. Admiral, 6 million civilians who would have died in a Krythar invasion will now live. No one is questioning the humanitarian value of your actions. Commander, said Dr. Eliza Nohara, the civilian strategic advisor to the council. Unlike many of her colleagues, she used her full title rather than the abbreviation. We're interested in the long-term strategic implications. You've given humanity unprecedented influence within the coalition. Influence we should use wisely, Mara agreed. The coalition has recognized the value of human tactical thinking, but they still view us as junior partners in the alliance. And the Krythar? Admiral Chen asked. You've had more direct interaction with Marshal Gresham than any human in history. What's your assessment? Mara chose her words carefully. The Krythar respect strength and cunning. They're not naturally inclined toward peace, but they're pragmatic. If the cost of continued aggression outweighs the potential gains, they'll maintain the treaty. So our best defense is to ensure that cost remains high, General Marcus Okafor concluded. Not necessarily through military means alone, Mara countered. The Krythar are curious about humans. They see something in us that intrigues them, our ability to compensate for physical limitations through innovation and adaptability. There's potential for cultural exchange that could strengthen the peace more effectively than any show of force. The council members exchanged glances, clearly surprised by this assessment. Humans had been conditioned by centuries of speculative fiction to expect alien species to be either overtly hostile or enlightened beyond human comprehension. The reality that advanced species could be simultaneously warlike and curious, aggressive and respectful, was more complex and perhaps more hopeful. You're proposing cultural diplomacy with a species that was attempting genocide 2 months ago, Dr. Nohara said, her tone neutral, but her expression skeptical. I'm proposing we understand them better, Mara clarified. The Krythar don't view their military actions as genocide, but as natural competition for resources and territory. Their ethical framework is alien to ours, but not incomprehensible. If we want lasting peace, we need to engage with them on those terms while demonstrating why our ethical standards serve everyone's interests better. The discussion continued for hours, with Mara providing detailed insights into both coalition and Krythar psychology, tactics, and social structures. By the end, the Council had drafted a comprehensive strategy for humanity's role in maintaining and strengthening the newly established peace. Admiral Chen approached Mara privately after the formal session concluded. Impressive analysis, Commander. You've given us much to consider. Thank you, Admiral. Your next assignment will be crucial. We're establishing a new joint task force focused on implementing the cultural exchange initiatives you proposed. Given your unique experience with both the Coalition and the Krythar, you're the natural choice to lead it. Mara hadn't expected this development. A diplomatic role, Admiral. Diplomacy backed by demonstrated military competence. Admiral Chen clarified, with a slight smile. The Krythar will respect the tactician who outmaneuvered them far more than any career diplomat we could send. And so, 3 weeks later, Commander Mara Kane found herself aboard a specialized diplomatic vessel, bound for the newly established neutral zone between Coalition and Krythar space. Her mission: to establish the framework for sustained, peaceful interaction between 3 vastly different civilizations. The Harmony was unlike any military vessel Mara had served on before. Designed specifically for cross-species diplomatic missions, it featured adaptable environmental sections that could accommodate the biological needs of dozens of different species. From methane breathers to silicon-based life forms, the ship's central conference chamber could be reconfigured for any combination of delegation sizes and physical requirements. Captain Elena Reyes had requested reassignment to serve as the Harmony's military commander, providing security and tactical support for Mara's diplomatic mission. Their reunion on the ship's bridge was warm but professional. "Commander," Reyes said with a formal salute that barely concealed her smile, "welcome aboard the strangest assignment of our careers." "Stranger than ambushing a Krevthar battle fleet without authorization?" Mara asked with raised eyebrows. "Point taken. But at least then we knew who we were fighting. Now we're supposed to make friends with them. Not friends, necessarily. Just not enemies." The first trilateral meeting was scheduled to take place at Outpost Zenith, a newly constructed space station positioned precisely at the junction point between Coalition, Krevthar, and independent human space. The symbolism was deliberate and powerful. 3 civilizations meeting as equals at the place where their territories converged. As the Harmony approached the station, Mara stood at the observation deck, watching the massive structure grow larger in the viewport. Zenith was an engineering marvel, with 3 distinct sections reflecting the architectural styles and environmental preferences of each participating power. The Coalition section featured the flowing, organic curves typical of Varan design. The Krevthar section was angular and fortress-like, and the human section balanced functionality with aesthetic touches that reflected Earth's diverse cultural heritage. "Impressive, isn't it?" Admiral Veen said, joining her at the viewport. The Varan commander had been selected as the Coalition's chief representative for the trilateral talks. "A physical manifestation of what we're trying to achieve," Mara agreed. 3 distinct approaches coexisting in a shared framework. An apt metaphor. Though I suspect the real challenges lie ahead. Not in architecture, but in reconciling fundamentally different worldviews. Mara nodded. The Krevthar view expansion as a biological imperative. The Coalition prioritizes stability and predictable growth. Humans. She paused, considering. We're still figuring out what we prioritize as a species. Perhaps that adaptability is your greatest strength, Admiral Veen suggested. The ability to reconsider and redefine your priorities as circumstances change. The docking procedure went smoothly, and the combined Human Coalition delegation was greeted by the station's multinational staff. The Krevthar delegation had already arrived and was waiting in the central chamber, the neutral ground where the actual negotiations would take place. Mara had prepared extensively for this moment, studying everything known about Krevthar diplomatic protocols and cultural taboos. As she led the human contingent into the chamber, she was acutely aware of the historical significance of the meeting. This wasn't just about preventing another war. It was about establishing the foundation for a fundamentally different relationship between 3 major galactic powers. Marshal Gresham rose from his massive chair as the human and Coalition delegations entered. Behind him stood a dozen Krevthar officers and advisors, their posture formal, but not overtly aggressive. The Marshal's 4 eyes focused on Mara immediately. "Commander Kane," he said, his translator conveying his deep, resonant voice with remarkable fidelity. "Once again, we meet at a pivotal moment." "Marshal Gresham," Mara replied with a formal bow, calibrated to convey respect without submission, a distinction the Krevthar would appreciate. "I trust you find Outpost Zenith suitable for our discussions. The station is well designed. Your species has an unexpected talent for creating spaces that accommodate multiple biological forms." There was genuine appreciation in his voice. A useful skill for facilitators. The subtle positioning in his statement wasn't lost on Mara. The Krevthar were acknowledging humanity's potential role as intermediaries between the ancient powers of the Coalition and the Krevthar Imperium. It was a role that played to human strengths, their adaptability, and their relative lack of historical baggage with either major power. The formal opening of the trilateral talks proceeded according to the carefully negotiated protocol. Representatives from each civilization presented their core priorities and concerns, establishing the framework for the more detailed discussions to follow. Throughout the presentations, Mara observed the non-verbal cues and subtle reactions of both the Coalition and Krevthar delegations, noting areas of potential agreement and flashpoints that would require careful navigation. When the formal session concluded for the day, Marshal Gresham approached Mara directly, dismissing his advisors with a gesture. "A word in private, Commander?" Mara nodded, signaling to her own staff to give them space. The massive Krevthar commander towered over her, but his posture was deliberately non-threatening. "These talks," he said without preamble. "Many in my command structure view them as a temporary measure, a pause before inevitable conflict resumes. And you, Marshal? What do you view them as?" His outer eyes narrowed, that expression she had come to recognize as thoughtful consideration. "I have fought for 60 cycles, Commander Kane. I have conquered worlds and species. It is what the Krevthar do. It is what we have always done. But your tactics at Krithar 9 demonstrated something unexpected." "Which was?" "That strength can take forms we had not considered. The quiet voice that speaks with precision may accomplish what the loudest battle cry cannot." He made a gesture that his translator didn't attempt to interpret, something culturally specific to the Krevthar. "I am curious about what other surprises your species might offer, enough to give these talks a genuine chance of success." It was perhaps the most honest statement of intent Mara had ever heard from a Krevthar commander. Not a commitment to peace as humans or the Coalition would understand it, but an acknowledgement of interest in an alternative path, at least temporarily. "Then we have a foundation to build upon, Marshal," she said. "Curiosity is a powerful motivator for humans as well." The talks continued for 3 weeks, with each day bringing new challenges and occasional breakthroughs. The Coalition representatives, led by Admiral Veen, gradually shifted from their algorithmic approach to negotiation toward a more adaptable stance that incorporated human-style intuitive leaps when the traditional methods reached an impasse. The Krevthar, for their part, demonstrated an unexpected willingness to compromise on territorial issues in exchange for technological and cultural exchange opportunities. Mara found herself increasingly serving as the bridge between the two ancient powers, translating not just words, but concepts and values across the vast gulfs of evolutionary and cultural difference that separated the species. It was exhausting, demanding work that required her to remain constantly alert to nuances and implications that could easily be missed. During a rare quiet moment between sessions, she stood alone in the observation lounge, watching the stars and considering how far they had come, and how far they still had to go. "You should rest," Captain Reyes said, entering the lounge with 2 cups of what smelled like actual Earth coffee, a rare luxury this far from home. "You've been mediating for 16 hours straight." Mara accepted the coffee gratefully. "There's too much at stake to rest." "Which is exactly why you need to," Reyes countered. "You're the linchpin of this entire process. If you burn out, the talks collapse." "No pressure," Mara said with a tired smile. "Seriously, though, what you've accomplished here is already historic. 3 weeks ago, the Krevthar and the Coalition were ready to annihilate each other. Now they're discussing joint scientific expeditions to the galactic core." Mara sipped her coffee, letting the familiar taste and aroma center her thoughts. "It's still fragile. One misinterpreted statement, one perceived slight, and we could lose everything we've gained." "True, but that's the nature of peace, isn't it? Always more fragile than war, always requiring more care and attention." Reyes gestured toward the viewport, where the vast sweep of the galaxy was visible beyond the station's protective fields. "Worth the effort, though." The final day of the initial round of trilateral talks arrived with a sense of both accomplishment and trepidation. The 3 delegations had achieved more than anyone had realistically expected, establishing frameworks for ongoing dialogue, crisis management protocols, and even preliminary cultural exchange programs. But the true test would come in the implementation of these agreements, in the thousands of small interactions that would either strengthen or undermine the foundation they had built. In the central chamber, Marshal Gresham, Admiral Veen, and Commander Kane signed the Zenith Accords, the formal document that codified the outcomes of their negotiations. As the signing ceremony concluded, Marshal Gresham addressed the assembled representatives. "The Krevthar have a saying," he began, his translator working to convey the nuances of his native language. "The strongest current carves the deepest channel. For millennia, we have understood this to mean that overwhelming force determines the course of history. Perhaps we have been interpreting it too narrowly." He turned his four-eyed gaze toward Mara. "Sometimes the strongest current is not the most visible. Sometimes it flows quietly beneath the surface, shaping the landscape in ways that are only recognized after they have transformed everything." The Marshal raised his massive hand in the formal Krevthar salute of respect. "To the quiet currents that have brought us to this moment, and to those who listen for them when others hear only the roar of battle." Admiral Veen, representing the Coalition, spoke next. "For 2 centuries, the Coalition has relied on the predictive power of our technology to chart our course through an uncertain galaxy. We calculated probabilities, analyzed patterns, and followed the path of highest likelihood." His scales shifted to the bright blue of formal ceremony as he continued. "At Krythar 9, we learned the limitations of that approach. Some voices cannot be reduced to algorithms. Some insights come not from processing power, but from the quiet wisdom that sees what others miss." The Admiral turned to face Mara directly. "The Coalition acknowledges its debt to Commander Kane and to humanity, not just for the victory at Krythar 9, but for reminding us of a truth we had forgotten, that diversity of thought is our greatest strength, and that the quietest voice may carry the most crucial message." It fell to Mara to deliver the final address. As she stepped forward, she felt the weight of responsibility, not just for humanity's interests, but for the fragile peace they had all worked so hard to establish. "Marshal Gresham, Admiral Veen, honored representatives," she began. "3 months ago, our civilization stood on the brink of a conflict that would have claimed millions of lives. Today, we stand together at the beginning of a different path." She gestured to the viewport, where the stars shone with cold, distant light. "The galaxy is vast beyond comprehension, filled with wonders and terrors that none of our species has yet encountered. We will need each other's strengths if we are to face what lies ahead. The Krevthar bring the courage and determination that have allowed them to survive in the harshest environments. The Coalition brings the wisdom accumulated over millennia of cooperation between diverse species. And humanity." She paused, considering what her own species truly offered to this historic alliance. "Humanity brings perspective. We are newcomers to the galactic community, unbound by the weight of ancient rivalries and traditional thinking. We see possibilities where others see only established patterns. We hear the quiet voices that are often drowned out by the certainties of the past." Mara looked from the Krevthar delegation to the Coalition representatives and back again. "This is not the end of our differences. It is not even the end of our conflicts. But it is, perhaps, the beginning of a new understanding, one in which we recognize that true strength lies not in domination, but in the wisdom to know when to fight and when to listen." As the ceremony concluded and the delegates dispersed to prepare for their respective journeys home, Mara found herself once again standing at the viewport, watching the stars. Admiral Veen joined her, his scaled skin now returned to its normal gray hue. "Your words were well chosen, Commander," he said, "particularly about this being the beginning, not the end." "The hard work starts now," Mara agreed. "Implementing these agreements, building trust through small, daily interactions." "Yes, and preparing for the inevitable setbacks and misunderstandings that will test our commitment," The Admiral's gaze remained fixed on the stars. But I find myself more optimistic than I have been in many cycles. Perhaps because we have been reminded of something essential that we had forgotten. What's that, Admiral? That wisdom often speaks softly, and that those who listen carefully may hear truths that others miss. He turned to her, with a gesture of formal respect. The quiet human taught us that lesson at considerable risk to herself. The Coalition will not forget it again. As the Harmony prepared to depart from Outpost Zenith, Mara received one final visitor in her quarters. Marshal Gresham, accompanied by a single aide, requested a private audience. It was unprecedented for a Krevthar marshal to board a human vessel, but Mara authorized the visit without hesitation. The marshal ducked his massive frame through the doorway, his armor gleaming under the ship's lights. Commander Kane, I wish to convey something directly, without the formality of official channels. I'm listening, Marshal. He produced a small object from a compartment in his armor, a crystalline sphere that glowed with an inner light. This is a Krevthar memory stone. It contains the tactical records of the Battle of Krithar 9, from our perspective. It is traditionally given to a worthy opponent as acknowledgement of their skill. Mara accepted the stone carefully, recognizing the significant cultural gesture. I'm honored, Marshal. Study it well. You will find that we have already begun adapting our tactics based on what we learned from your approach. There was something like amusement in his alien features. The next encounter between our forces, should diplomacy fail, will not follow the same pattern. I would expect nothing less, Mara replied with equal frankness. Though I hope that day never comes. As do I, Commander. The Krevthar have fought the same enemies in the same ways for millennia. There is staleness in such patterns. Your species has brought something new to this region of space. Something unpredictable. Is that a compliment or a warning, Marshal? Both. His four eyes fixed on her with intense focus. Conflict between great powers is inevitable over sufficient time, but conflict need not mean destruction. Sometimes, it can lead to growth. Your victory at Krithar 9 forced the Krevthar to reconsider assumptions we had held for centuries. That is a gift, in its way. After the Marshal departed, Mara studied the memory stone, watching as it projected holographic recreations of the battle from the Krevthar perspective. The stone contained not just tactical data, but emotional and psychological impressions. The confusion and then grudging respect as human vessels executed maneuvers that defied prediction. The growing recognition that they faced an adversary unlike any they had encountered before. It was a window into an alien mind, offered freely as a gesture of respect from one warrior to another. And perhaps, Mara reflected, it was also the first step toward a deeper understanding between their species. The Harmony departed Outpost Zenith the following day, beginning its journey back to Earth with the formal accords and a wealth of new knowledge about both the Coalition and the Krevthar. Mara stood on the bridge beside Captain Reyes as the station receded in the view screen. So, Reyes said conversationally, not bad for a quiet human who was ignored at a war council. Mara allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes being underestimated is an advantage. True, though I don't think anyone will be underestimating you, or humanity, again anytime soon. As the ship accelerated toward the transit point that would begin their long journey home, Mara considered everything that had transpired since that fateful council meeting aboard the High Justice. A single question about communication redundancies, dismissed as irrelevant. A desperate gamble to save millions of lives. A battle that changed the balance of power in an entire sector of space. And now, a fragile piece with the potential to evolve into something more enduring. All because someone had finally listened to the quiet human. The stars streaked past as the Harmony entered transit, carrying Mara Kane and the promise of a new era back toward the planet where humanity had first looked up at the night sky and wondered what waited among the stars. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with the knowledge that sometimes the softest voice carries the most crucial message, and that true strength lies not in domination, but in the wisdom to know when to fight and when to listen.